Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the second series of Among the Ancients, a close reading series from the London Review of Books with Emily Wilson and me, Thomas Jones. For the next few episodes, we're going to be looking at the work of writers from what used to be known as the Silver Age of Latin literature, from the century or so following the death of the Emperor Augustus. If it seems odd that we're skipping over the so-called Golden Age, that's mostly because we discussed the work of some of the poets writing then, that is, during the late Republic and under Augustus, in season 1. Virgil, of course, is one of them, and I think we're going to have to mention the Aeneid a little bit in today's conversation, which is about another great later Roman epic, Lucan's Civil War, which was written under the Emperor Nero in the early 60s AD, but is set in the early 40s BC during the civil war between Julius Caesar and the Republican forces led by Pompey the Great. So we have two historical contexts that will need filling in, Emily. Shall we begin with when the poem was written? Could you give us a brief account of Lucan's brief life and his relationship with Nero?
Sure, yes. So he was born from a very famous, very literary family. His grandfather was the guy we know as Seneca the Elder, who was a rich businessman who also wrote an account of the celebrity declaimers or orators of his age. He had 3 sons, one of whom was a consul called Gallio. The second was the famous Seneca the Younger, the philosopher / all kinds of things, advisor to Nero. And the youngest, Mila, was the father of the poet Lucan. Lucan was born in Cordoba in Spain, but came to Rome as a little child. Was educated in both Rome and Athens, and then was summoned back from Athens to be close with Nero, who promoted him very, very high up the cursus honorum, up the career ladder, suggesting a lot of favour from Nero to Lucan in Lucan's youth. But we also are told by the ancient biographers that they had a falling out, and Lucan was banned by Nero from performing his poetry in public, perhaps because his poetry was thought to be critical of Nero, or perhaps Nero was jealous because Lucan was a better poet than Nero himself. And then at some point or other, probably after Lucan's uncle Seneca had been forced by Nero to retire in 62 AD, Lucan also was in the bad books of Nero and joined what's known as the Pisonian conspiracy to assassinate Nero. And he, like his uncle, was forced to commit suicide when he was only 25 years old in 65. So we know quite a lot about his life. And also just to note that the poem that we have that we're going to be talking about today, which is presumably what was known as the Civil War, Bellum Civilia, was only a tiny fraction of his output. You might think somebody who killed themselves when they were 25 wouldn't have had time to write very much. But he was extremely prolific writer and wrote tons of other poems and prose works, even though he didn't live very long.
And he was the same sort of age as Nero, right? They were almost exact contemporaries.
Same sort of age, yes, only 2 years apart, exactly, yes.
And at the beginning of this poem, after 30 or so lines on the horrors of civil war, there's a kind of dedication to Nero, I guess, where the narrator says that all these terrible things were worth it if it was the only way to bring Nero to power. And there's a question of I'll ask how seriously we're supposed to take that, but maybe we could listen to it first.
Yes, let's listen to it first. And maybe just also a footnote to this. We also know that he wrote a separate Laudes Neronis, praises of Nero. So he was clearly good at writing Neronian panegyric and inserts a bit of Neronian panegyric into the Civil War poem. And we could debate whether or not we think it's inserted in an ironic or totally straight-faced way here. So this is the translation by Susanna Morton Braund.
But now the walls are tumbling in the towns of Italy. The houses half destroyed and the defences collapsed. The huge stones lie. No guardian occupies the homes, and in the ancient city wanders only an occasional inhabitant. Hesperia bristles now with thorns, unploughed through many a year, lacking the hands for fields which demand them. The author of such a great calamity will prove to be not you, fierce Pyrrhus, nor the Carthaginian. No foreign sword has ever penetrated so. It is wounds inflicted by the hand of fellow citizen that have sunk deep. But if the fates could find no other way for Nero's coming, if eternal kingdoms are purchased by the gods at great cost, If heaven could serve its thunderer only after wars with the ferocious giants, then we have no complaint. O gods, for this reward we accept even these crimes and guilt, though Pharsalia fill its dreadful plains. Though the Carthaginians shade with blood be sated, though the final battle be joined at fatal Munda, though added to these horrors Caesar be the famine of Perugia and the struggles of Mutina, the fleets overwhelmed near rugged Leucas, and the slave wars under burning Etna. Yet Rome owes much to citizens' weapons, because it was for you that all was done.
I mean, especially given Nero's reputation nowadays as a sort of the proverbially terrible ruler. It's quite hard to take that at face value, but even if you don't think, even if you quite liked Nero, as he may have done at the time, it's a long list of things to be weighed in the balance against him. So
exactly. It doesn't actually say anything nice about Nero. It just says it was worth it and let me list all the horrible things and assert that those horrible things were somehow worth it, but it doesn't actually say why, which I think is quite a notable admission. I mean, it's also, you already said in the setup that Lucan is writing Latin epic after Virgil's Aeneid had already received great acclaim in the previous generation, and nobody could write a Latin epic without looking back to the Aeneid. At the start of the Aeneid, Virgil's narrator discusses the cost of empire and asks whether it had to cost so much effort. Tantae molis erat Romanum condere gentem. Did it have to be such a high price to found the Roman people? And so Lucan's sort of suggesting that the foundation of Nero is sort of equivalent to the foundation of the whole of Rome. Rome had to be destroyed in order to have Nero. I mean, I tend to think that there has to be some element of irony about this, but of course one could read it as this is Lucan just saying it was all worth it.
Yeah, and I mean, you could say, well, the reason that he doesn't praise Nero was because that all goes without saying. We all, as it were, think he fiddled while Rome burned, or I mean, he didn't. But those things that he's thought to have done, that if you say Nero to someone nowadays, they think baddie. But if you think, it could be that his wonderfulness goes without saying. But I prefer an ironic reading, certainly.
Yes. I mean, the ancient sources tell us also that there was supposedly the golden first 5 years of Nero's reign, when he was restrained by Lucan's uncle Seneca and taking advice from reasonable people and killing fewer of his family members than he later went on to do. So one could think maybe he's composing the praises of Nero in the context of that. One could also think maybe this is a way of reminding Nero that he should be thinking about his legacy, and that if he wants to not be a Caesar figure who's going to burst through all bonds and destroy the country that he's laying claim and laying waste to, he might want to take some lessons from this poem.
Yeah, so maybe we should talk a bit about then that earlier time. Well, I suppose it's in terms of Nero's legacy. Again, we know now that Nero was the last of the Julio-Claudian emperors, the dynasty founded by Augustus, in a sense founded by Julius Caesar, I guess. So that in Lucan's Civil War is a poem written at what turned out to be the end of an era in Roman history, about that era's origins. So Lucan was writing roughly 110 years after the events described in the poem, that Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC. And that, I don't know if these sorts of comparisons are helpful or meaningful, but anyway, it's interesting to me that makes the events he was writing about as distant to him as the First World War is to us now, or as the Battle of Bosworth would have been to Shakespeare when he wrote Richard III. Yes, get the question. What's the relationship between Lucan's time and the time of the poem?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, presumably he's not writing about this history as purely a academic history exercise. I mean, the whole way that he sets it up is that this is foundational, just as Virgil's mythical account of Aeneas making his way to Italy is presented not just as this is an interesting set of historical myths, but that this is somehow going to teach you how to read what is Rome in the present, in the Augustan age. And I think similarly, Lucan's supposedly historical narrative is teaching you something about what is Rome nowadays under Nero. It's showing you a world of of chaos, of fortune, of fate, of overwhelming passion or furor, and of trio of leaders, none of whom I think are presented as in any way heroic or admirable. I mean, those lines that we just read are the only sort of positive lines about any leader in the whole of this epic poem. So it's showing you a Rome that's constantly destroying itself and destroying itself in suicidal ways.
Yeah, so maybe I guess you should give us a quick rundown of the events that the poem, or I could say describes, but it's almost more refers to. I mean, there is the assumption this is not a good book to read. If you don't already know the history of those civil wars in the 40s BC, Lucan is not a very good starting point, is it?
Terrible starting point, yes, because he's so anti-narrative. I mean, whereas almost any other epic poem that you try will actually tell you a story of some kind, this sort of evokes a story, but it's mostly set pieces, and it sort of leaps from one event to another, and here's another long rhetorical speech full of paradoxes, and then here's another tableau in which people are killing each other in some virtuosic way, and then here's another rhetorical speech, and it doesn't give you any of the sort of background filler of this is how this event leads to that event. It's very much a sort of rhetorical epic, melodramatic, scene-setting kind of epic, as opposed to I wonder what's going to happen next kind of story. You don't ever get any sense of what exactly happened if you don't already know. So what happened if you don't already know? As you already said, Julius Caesar has spent the previous decade conquering Gaul and Britain and comes back as triumphant Roman general and does a sort of Odysseus of the returning hero is now going to conquer his own homeland. So he crosses the Rubicon, meaning he literally crosses this tiny little river, but meaning that he's invading Italy as if it were a foreign country. And then the whole poem focuses on a very short amount of historical time between 49 and 46, and focuses on the conflict between Caesar taking control of both Italy and then the whole spreading out across the Roman Empire, and the forces under Pompey the Great, who are sort of the only block to Caesar's triumph, and yet Pompey is constantly just running away. And what we constantly see is Pompey either delaying a little bit or running away somewhere else, getting defeated somewhere else. And then also the figure who takes over from Pompey once Pompey is inevitably killed, Cato, the Stoic Republican hero, who again, within the poem we have, which probably isn't finished, Cato doesn't die, but we know he's going to die. So we know the Republic is going to lose and Caesar is going to win. And that we get these evocations of how that happens without exactly getting narrative of how that happens.
Thanks for listening to this extract from Among the Ancients 2, a close reading series from the London Review of Books. To listen to the full episode and all our other close reading series, including Series 1 of Among the Ancients, sign up to our close reading subscription at lrb.me/close readings or click on the link in the description.